Picture this: the narrow, winding streets of old Prague, shrouded in a milky white fog, where every worn cobblestone seems to have soaked up and held on to centuries of secrets, whispering them to the biting autumn wind. Here, the air hangs thick with a complex tapestry of scents: the pungent incense wafting from ancient synagogues, the tantalizing aroma of freshly baked turdelnik from a nearby bakery, the damp chill rising from the nearby Vltava River, and an almost palpable, cloying fear. Deep in the very heart of the Jewish quarter, in the labyrinthine Yosefov, wedged between the river and the old town walls, in the shadow of majestic Gothic spires and under the mysterious cloak of night, a legend is born. A tale not of a being created by God in the primordial act of creation, but by man, fashioned from riverside clay, desperation, and forbidden knowledge. This is the gripping story of the Golem, the silent colossus, a mighty servant summoned to protect, yet also a fearsome living reminder of how dangerously thin the line is between salvation and destruction, between the divine act of creation and the audacious, blasphemous game of playing creator. Are you ready to plunge headfirst into the murky waters of medieval mysticism, decipher the secret codes of Kabbalah, and unravel the tangled web of intrigue to approach the truth hidden behind the myth of the Prague Golem? This story is not just a blood-curdling folktale. It's an ancient mirror reflecting timeless, uncomfortable questions about the power of faith, the burden of power, the weight of responsibility, and the elusive very essence of what it means to be human, or a creature desperately striving to resemble one. Brace yourself. Our journey into the very heart of darkness and light, where hope and horror intertwine, begins right now. And believe me, it will force you to see old legends in a completely new light, feeling their chilling breath upon your skin. How do you survive when the world around you thirsts for your destruction? Let's transport ourselves back several centuries into the simmering cauldron of the 16th century, to the very heart of the bustling, multifaceted, and, let's be frank, far from always friendly Prague, capital of Bohemia and residence of the Holy Roman Emperors. Imagine the labyrinth of Yosefov, the Jewish quarter, seemingly caught in a vice between the cold waters of the Vltava and the majestic buildings of the old town. It was a world apart within a world, with its own strict rules, age-old traditions, the melodious Yiddish language, and of course its own deeply rooted fears, passed down through generations. Life for the Jewish community here resembled a perilous tightrope walk over a bottomless abyss of fanaticism and hatred. On one hand, there were periods of relative tolerance, especially under the patronage of such an extraordinary ruler as Rudolf II, the melancholic emperor known for his passion for alchemy, astrology, and mystical teachings, who, according to numerous rumors, highly valued the wisdom and knowledge of Jewish scholars and Kabbalists. These periods allowed the community to breathe more freely, build magnificent synagogues like the legendary Old New Synagogue, the oldest active synagogue in Europe, whose stones remember the prayers of dozens of generations, develop science and philosophy, and flourish in trade and crafts. Prague was rightly considered one of the most important centers of Jewish learning and culture in the Ashkenazi world. But on the other hand, the sword of Damocles of sudden and brutal violence constantly hung over the community. Deep-seated ignorance, ingrained superstitions, and banal economic envy towards more successful neighbors spawned monstrous, absurd accusations, the most terrifying and bloody of which was the blood libel. The savage but persistent belief that Jews used the blood of Christian infants to bake matzah, or for other ritual purposes, especially on the eve of Passover. These rumors, actively fueled by fanatical preachers, instigators, or simply greedy individuals hoping to profit from Jewish property during a pogrom, could erupt into an uncontrollable firestorm of violence at any moment. Imagine this oppressive atmosphere of constant tension. One day you are a respected merchant, a talented artisan, or a revered scholar, and the next, a crazed mob, blinded by lies and centuries of hatred, bursts into your home, plunders your hard-earned possessions, kills indiscriminately, desecrates and burns sacred books. There was virtually nowhere to turn for protection. City authorities often turned a blind eye, sometimes even tacitly encouraging the violence to divert popular anger from their own problems. In such a tense, explosive environment, the Prague community lived, worked, and prayed, desperately needing a miracle, an intercessor, an indestructible symbol of hope that could physically stand against the surrounding darkness. And it was from this fertile ground, thoroughly soaked with tears, fear, and fervent prayers, that the mighty figure of the Golem was destined to arise. This is not just a whimsical fantasy. It's the cry of the soul of an entire people, cornered and seeking salvation not only in heaven from the Almighty, but also here on sinful earth, even if that salvation had to be molded from the dust of the earth and animated by forbidden knowledge. Can one man become a shield for an entire people? And so, onto this anxious stage of history, bathed in the uncertain light of torches, steps a figure of truly titanic proportions, a legendary man, Rabbi Judah Loew ben Bezalel, known to the world as the Maharal of Prague. Forget for a moment the stereotypical image of a pale, stooped scholar spending days and nights over ancient folios. Rabbi Loew was a personality of a completely different caliber, vibrant, charismatic, a man of colossal, encyclopedic intellect, unbending will, and, as numerous rumors and legends persistently claimed, no lesser mystical power capable of influencing the course of events. He wasn't merely the chief rabbi and head of the rabbinical court of Prague in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. He was the acknowledged spiritual leader of his generation, an outstanding philosopher whose works are still studied today, a profound scholar of the Talmud and Jewish law, halakha, a brilliant mathematician and astronomer, whose wisdom and unquestionable authority were recognized far beyond the Jewish community. Popular lore persistently links his name with the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II himself. That eccentric ruler immersed in the search for the philosopher's stone and the secrets of the universe. It is said the emperor repeatedly invited Rabbi Lou to his chambers in Prague Castle for long philosophical and scientific discussions, and although skeptical historians still debate the reality and content of these meetings, the very existence of such legends speaks volumes about the Maharal's immense status and influence in contemporary society. He was a prolific author, leaving behind numerous profound works on the Talmud, ethics, philosophy, and Kabbalah, in which he demonstrated not only a masterful command of Jewish tradition, but also an excellent knowledge of the secular sciences and philosophy of his time. His commentaries on the Torah and Talmud, distinguished by their originality of thought and depth of analysis, remain an integral part of the curriculum in many yeshivas worldwide. But the Maharal was not only a brilliant theorist and thinker, he was above all a sensitive and caring shepherd to his community, deeply concerned about its fate in those turbulent times. He saw the suffering of his fellow Jews, felt the constant suffocating threat of pogroms and false blood libels on his own skin. And it was this empathy, this all-consuming concern, this desperate desire to protect his people from physical annihilation at any cost, according to legend, that pushed him to take the incredibly risky, almost blasphemous step, the creation of an artificial being, the Golem. In Jewish culture, the Maharal is revered as one of the greatest sages, Gaon, and righteous men, tzaddik, of all time. His grave in the old Jewish cemetery in Prague remains a place of pilgrimage to this day, where people from all over the world come with requests and prayers, leaving small notes, kvitlash, in the cracks of the ancient tombstone, hoping for his heavenly intercession. He became a symbol not only of boundless erudition, but also of the spiritual strength capable of resisting the evil and injustice of this world. And although rigorous historical scholarship finds no direct evidence of his involvement in the creation of the Golem, indeed, the first written mentions of the legend itself appear only a couple of centuries after his death, popular memory has forever and inextricably linked his name with this mystical act of creation, transforming him from a real historical figure into an almost mythical sorcerer who dared to animate clay to save his people from imminent doom. How can letters become the building blocks of life? But how could such an audacious idea even arise, that a human being, even the greatest sage and righteous man, could replicate the act of creation, breathe life into inanimate matter? To grasp the roots of this concept, we must delve into the most mysterious, esoteric, and often misunderstood realm of Judaism, Kabbalah. Forget for a moment the popular culture simplifications, the red strings on wrists, and other superficial attributes. Authentic Kabbalah is a profound mystical tradition, a complex philosophical system striving to comprehend the hidden secrets of creation, the nature of the divine, the structure of the cosmos, and humanity's true place in the universe. One of the key texts underlying the very possibility of creating a golem is the ancient, concise, and incredibly enigmatic treatise, Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Creation. This text, traditionally attributed to the patriarch Abraham, describes God's process of creating the world not through physical actions or uttering words in the usual sense, but through complex combinations of the letters of the Holy Hebrew alphabet and the 10 Sephirot, the primary divine emanations or attributes that form the structure of reality. According to Sefer Yetzirah, the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet are not just graphic symbols for recording speech. They are fundamental spiritual forces, primordial elements, the building blocks of all existence, the divine tools used by the Creator himself when fashioning the universe. Each letter possesses its own unique numerical, gematria, phonetic, and profound symbolic power, connected to specific aspects of being. By combining these letters in a strictly prescribed order, meditating upon them, and intoning sacred names of God, among which the most powerful and secret was considered the Shem HaMepharash, the ineffable name of 72 letters or syllables, believed to be encoded in the verses of Exodus describing the crossing of the Red Sea. Adherents of Kabbalah believed it was possible to mimic the divine act of creation, albeit on a much smaller earthly scale. The creation of a golem is, in essence, the pinnacle of practical Kabbalah, a daring attempt by man to replicate this divine process. It's crucial to understand this is not sorcery in the pagan sense, not the summoning of demons or elemental spirits. It is an extremely complex spiritual ritual, demanding not only the deepest knowledge of Torah and Kabbalah, but also absolute personal holiness, a righteous life, and crystal clear intentions from the Creator. It was believed that only a great righteous man, having reached the highest level of spiritual perfection and closeness to God, could dare such a step without risking catastrophe upon himself and the world. The process itself involved not only the physical shaping of an anthropomorphic figure from pure clay, but also lengthy, exhausting meditations, fasts, prayers, and the recitation of specific, secret combinations of letters and divine names. Often, legends mention that the Creator inscribed the word Amt, Emet, truth, in Hebrew, on the clay figure's forehead, symbolizing the divine seal on creation. To later kill the golem, one merely had to erase the first letter, Aleph, A, leaving the word MT, Met, dead. Another common version speaks of a parchment inscribed with the Shem HaMepharash placed in the golem's mouth or under its tongue, serving as the source of its artificial life. This underscores the key idea. The golem's life was not organic, inherent to itself, but sustained solely by divine power, channeled through sacred texts and names, entirely dependent on the will and spiritual state of its creator. It is an act of incredible spiritual audacity, a dangerous balancing act on the edge of the permissible. For here man essentially emulates God the Creator, and Kabbalah itself always contained strict warnings about the dangers of such a path, the possibility of fatal error, and the terrible consequences of abusing sacred knowledge or using it with impure intentions. From the dust of the earth, by the power of the word, how a legend is born. Now, try to envision the scene, shrouded in a thick cloak of secrecy and the pre-dawn twilight of a Prague night. The great Rabbi Luo, perhaps accompanied by two of his closest and most trusted disciples or his son-in-law, equally initiated into the secrets of Kabbalah, descends to the deserted bank of the Vltava. The river, a silent witness to so many dramatic events in Prague's history, slowly carries its dark waters, reflecting the cold light of distant stars and the few flickering lights in the windows of the sleeping city. Under the cover of deep night, far from prying and hostile eyes, in a place known only to the initiated, they gather pure, undefiled clay, the very primordial matter from which, according to the sacred book of Bereshit, Genesis, the Almighty Himself created the first man, Adam, whose name Adam in Hebrew is inextricably linked to the word Adamah, earth, dust. Then begins the mystery, the sacred rite demanding utmost concentration and spiritual purity. This is not mere crafting of a figure from pliable material. It's a complex ritual, each stage imbued with deep mystical meaning and symbolism. The clay figure must be created in the image and likeness of man, but initially, it lacks the gift of speech, reason, and soul in the full sense. It is merely a vessel, ready to receive life. What follows are long hours of intense prayer, deep meditation, and the recitation of extremely complex mystical formulas drawn from the depths of Sefer Yetzirah and other Kabbalistic texts. The participants in the ritual usually had to undergo strict purification rites beforehand, observe fasting and abstinence to achieve the necessary state of spiritual purity and receptivity. Legends differ in the minute details of this process, offering various versions. According to one, Rabbi Lo and his assistants performed ritual circumambulations around the clay figure laid out on the ground, usually 7 times, while intoning specific combinations of sacred letters and divine names, each corresponding to a particular aspect of creation and breathing the respective quality into the matter. Gradually, as the legends tell, the cold clay began to warm, glow from within, acquire color, and even the semblance of living flesh. At the ritual's climax, when the tension reached its peak, Rabbi Lo either placed a parchment scroll inscribed with the potent Shem HaMefarash into the Golem's open mouth, or, according to another version, wrote the sacred word Emet, truth, with his finger on its damp clay forehead. And then, the unthinkable happened. The clay came to life. Before the stunned creators stood a huge, mighty being, mute, with eyes devoid of meaningful human expression, but capable of understanding and implicitly obeying its creator's commands. Imagine the sacred awe and reverence mixed with primal terror and the awareness of their own audacity that the ritual participants must have felt at that moment. They had just crossed the invisible but strictly guarded line separating man from God, breathed artificial life into the inanimate. The golem was created, but what next? What was its true purpose? How to control this colossal blind force? The immeasurable responsibility for this creation now lay as a heavy burden on Rabbi Lowe's shoulders. This moment of creation is the pulsating heart of the legend, the point where the transcendent mysticism of Kabbalah meets the desperate earthly need of the Prague Jewish community for protection and salvation. It symbolizes both the pinnacle of the human spirit, daring to penetrate the secrets of God Himself, and the potential, mortal danger of playing with forces that humanity may not be able to fully comprehend or control. Savior of clay or harbinger of doom, and so he stands before his Creator, molded from dust and animated by secret knowledge. Golem Joseph, as he was sometimes called in legends, the giant of clay whose existence was sustained by the power of sacred letters and divine names. What, then, was his mission in this world, fraught with danger for his creators? In the vast majority of the Legends versions, the Golem's primary task was crystal clear, specific, and tragically conditioned by the realities of the time, protecting the Jewish quarter of Prague from bloody pogroms and, crucially relevant, from the insidious and false accusations of ritual murder of Christians, the so-called blood libel. Try to paint this picture in your mind, repeated year after year. On the eve of Jewish Passover, Pesach, when religious tension in the city reached its peak, sinister, frightening rumors begin to crawl through the quarter. Somewhere, malefactors secretly plant the corpse of a Christian child or body parts to blame the Jews, or simply an agitated crowd fueled by anti-Semitic sermons or cheap wine, gathers with torches and clubs to break into the ghetto and carry out a massacre. And then, blocking the path of the enraged mob, stands he, the Golem, huge, indestructible, significantly taller and stronger than any human, invulnerable to conventional weapons, silent and utterly fearless. He doesn't negotiate, doesn't try to persuade or reason. He simply obeys the command of his master and creator, Rabbi Lowe. Protect the community at all costs. With his supernatural strength, he disperses the mob of rioters, finds and neutralizes planted evidence, prevents violence and bloodshed, his very appearance striking panic into the hearts of enemies. His incredible physical strength, according to some later and perhaps embellished accounts, also allowed him to perform other, more mundane tasks. Carrying water from the river for communal needs, chopping vast quantities of firewood, assisting with the heaviest physical labor, especially during construction or maintaining order in the synagogue. However, his primary sacred role was that of a guardian, a tireless night watchman safeguarding the fragile sleep of the Jewish quarter. But managing such a unique and powerful being required adherence to the strictest rules and constant vigilance. The Golem was utterly devoid of its own will, initiative, or reason in the human sense. He was more like a biorobot, an instrument blindly and literally executing the orders given to him. This, in turn, created serious problems. Any imprecise, ambiguous, or misunderstood command could lead to unforeseen and even catastrophic consequences. the most famous and frequently mentioned problem related to the sanctity of Shabbat. On the seventh day, when the Torah mandates complete rest and forbids all work, the Golem, as a creature owing its existence to sacred texts and divine names, also had to be deactivated, put into a state of rest. Every Friday, before sunset, Rabbi Lowe had to strictly perform the shutdown ritual. Remove the parchment with the Shem HaMefarash from under the Golem's tongue or from its mouth, or erase the first letter Aleph from its forehead, so the Golem would revert to an immobile clay statue until Shabbat ended on Saturday evening. This crucial detail of the legend emphasizes the Golem's absolute dependence on its creator's will and the immutable laws of the Torah. The Golem is not a demon from the underworld, not a pagan elemental, but specifically a product of Jewish mystical tradition, entirely subject to its rules and limitations. He is the embodied, hard-won hope for protection and survival, but simultaneously a constant, unsettling reminder of the fragility of that protection, wholly dependent on the vigilance, wisdom, and responsibility of one single man. When the Savior becomes the monster. However, as often happens in ancient myths and cautionary tales about powerful but artificial creations, the newfound idol and sense of security could not last forever. Any power, even created with the best intentions for protection and justice, has a dangerous tendency to spin out of control, turning against its own creators or those it was meant to shield. And here, the numerous versions of the Golem legend begin to diverge, taking on increasingly darker, more disturbing and cautionary tones. What went wrong in Rabbi Lowe's bold experiment? One of the most common and dramatic versions tells that one Friday evening, the great rabbi, perhaps overly weary from the week's labors, lost in deep contemplation before the start of the Sabbath prayers, or simply preoccupied with preparations for welcoming Shabbat, made a fatal oversight. He simply forgot to deactivate the Golem in time, to remove the source of its supernatural life. Left, switched on, during the holy day of rest, the Golem, lacking clear instructions from its master or perhaps instinctively enraged by the very violation of the divine commandment for Sabbath rest, flew into an uncontrollable frenzy. He began smashing everything in sight in the narrow streets of the Jewish quarter. His blind, mindless strength, intended for defense against external enemies, now turned destructively against the very people he was supposed to protect. Imagine the indescribable horror of the Prague ghetto inhabitants. Their protector, their clay savior, their last hope had transformed into an uncontrollable, raging monster, threatening to destroy their homes and take their lives. According to another, more romanticized version, the Golem gradually began to show vague signs of a nascent will of its own, or at least some glitch occurred in its programming based on the sacred letters. Perhaps, as some tales recount, he saw a beautiful maiden from the community and felt some semblance of attraction towards her, and being rejected, as he was merely a clay effigy, went mad with grief and rage. Or perhaps his initial protective programming became overly aggressive, hypertrophied over time, and he began seeing threats and enemies even where there were none. attacking innocence. There is also a more philosophical version linked to the inscription Emet, truth, on his forehead. It is said the golem somehow realized that its own existence was not true, not authentic, but merely artificial, secondary, and this bitter realization drove it into a state of furious rage or deep existential despair. Some later stories depict him as a tragic figure, gradually gaining some semblance of consciousness, but suffering from his muteness, isolation, and inability to fully participate in human life. Whatever the true cause of this rebellion, the result was the same. The golem became deadly dangerous. The creation turned against its creator. Rabbi Lowe had to confront the terrifying, unforeseen consequences of his audacious act. He had to make the hardest decision and find a way to stop the monster he himself had brought into the world. This part of the legend is a powerful, timeless warning about the dangers of playing God, the unpredictability of any created force. Whether magic or technology, and the immense moral responsibility inevitably borne by the Creator for their creation. The moment the protector suddenly becomes the main threat is a classic dramatic trope, later repeated countless times in world literature and cinema. But here, in the context of the Prague legend, it holds particular depth, directly linked to the religious and ethical dilemmas of Judaism, to questions about the limits of human intervention in the divine order. Where does the clay giant sleep its eternal slumber? Confronted with the destructive, blind fury of his own creation, the great Rabbi Lowe bitterly realized that his bold but risky experiment had gone too far and turned into tragedy. The golem, created for the sole purpose of saving the community from annihilation, had now itself become the primary threat to its existence. Action had to be taken immediately, decisively, and irrevocably before it was too late. Summoning all his courage, drawing upon the full depth of his mystical knowledge and spiritual powers, the Maharal managed to stop the rampaging clay giant. How exactly did he achieve this? Here again, the legends offer several captivating scenarios. Perhaps, showing extraordinary bravery and cunning, he managed to trick the golem or get close enough amid the chaos to swiftly erase the first letter, Aleph, A, from its forehead, thereby transforming the sacred word Emet, truth, into the dreadful word Met, dead. In that instant, as the stories tell, the golem froze in place. Its mighty body went limp. The life force, granted by the complex combination of sacred letters, dissipated, and it became once more what it originally was, a huge, motionless, inert mass of raw clay. Another popular version recounts how the wise Rabbi Lowe used trickery. He ordered the golem to bend down to help him tie his shoelaces or perform some other simple action requiring bending. And at the moment the giant obediently stooped, the rabbi quickly removed the parchment scroll inscribed with the Shem HaMepharash, the source of its artificial life, from its mouth or from under its tongue. Deprived of this magical artifact, the golem instantly collapsed to the ground, lifeless and still. ' This was undoubtedly a tragic, but the only possible and necessary act. The Creator was forced to destroy his own creation with his own hands for the sake of the community's salvation, for the common good. But what to do now with the massive, heavy clay body? Simply discarding or burying it was not an option. After all, it had been created and animated using sacred rituals and divine names. It still retained a particle of holiness. And then, according to the most famous and enduring Prague legend, Rabbi Lowe and his loyal assistants, under the cover of night, secretly transported the lifeless remains of the Golem to the attic of the Old New Synagogue, the oldest and most sacred place of the Prague community. This attic space, called Genizah in Hebrew, was traditionally used for storing worn-out sacred texts, Torah scrolls, prayer books, and ritual objects that, according to Jewish law, cannot simply be destroyed or thrown away. The attic was securely locked, and entry was strictly forbidden to all outsiders under penalty of the harshest punishment, or even cherem, excommunication from the community. Rabbi Lowe, as the legend goes, personally placed a special curse on the attic door so that no one could ever enter and disturb the Golem's remains, or even worse and more dangerous, attempt to reanimate it by seizing the secret of its creation. This prohibition was strictly observed for centuries, spawning numerous mysterious rumors, speculations, and urban legends around it. Does the silent clay giant truly rest there, under a thick layer of centuries-old dust, among decaying scrolls, old prayer books, and broken synagogue furnishings? In the 19th and 20th centuries, daring individuals, journalists, researchers, mystics, attempted to secretly enter the enigmatic attic of the Old New Synagogue. However, their accounts are vague, contradictory, and often resemble fiction. Some claimed to have seen nothing but piles of old rubbish. Others swore they discerned the indistinct outline of a huge humanoid figure covered in ragged cloth in the dim light. The mystery of the Old New Synagogue's attic became an integral, thrilling part of Prague folklore, constantly fueling the unflagging interest in the Golem legend and leaving the main question open. Does it truly sleep there eternally, or will it one day, in an hour of greatest need and danger, be called back to life to protect its people? What hides behind the mask of the clay monster? The story of the Prague Golem is far more than just a gripping mystical thriller with horror elements set against the backdrop of medieval Prague. Deep within Jewish tradition, philosophy, and culture, it carries an immensely rich and multi-layered symbolic meaning, touching upon the very foundations of faith, ethics, psychology, and human existence itself. First and foremost, the Golem is a powerful, archetypal symbol of protection, salvation, and undying hope during the darkest periods of persecution. For the Jewish people, who throughout their long and tragic history faced centuries of hostility, forced expulsions, humiliation, and attempts at physical annihilation. The very idea of a supernatural, indestructible protector created by the wisdom and secret knowledge of their own spiritual leaders, was incredibly appealing and comforting. The golem embodied the cherished dream of a power capable of offering real resistance to injustice and blind violence, of the possibility to actively influence one's destiny, to take it into one's own hands, even if it required resorting to esoteric, almost forbidden Kabbalistic knowledge. It is the visible answer to the feeling of powerlessness against brute, overwhelming force, the materialization of fervent prayers for salvation here and now. However, like many profound symbols, the golem is extremely ambivalent, dualistic in nature. It also serves as a formidable, eternal warning about the danger of human hubris, the audacious attempt by man to equate himself with God in the most sacred act of creating life. Creating life from inanimate matter is the exclusive prerogative of the Almighty. And any human intrusion into this sacred sphere, even if dictated by the noblest intentions, is fraught with unpredictable and potentially catastrophic consequences. The golem's uncontrolled rampage symbolizes the futility and danger of human attempts to fully control the powerful forces of nature or spirit that they themselves unleash. This raises the timeless question of the Creator's responsibility for their creation, whether it be a clay giant from medieval Prague, a new scientific discovery, a revolutionary technology, or even a work of art. Furthermore, the figure of the golem can be seen as a complex metaphor for the Jewish people themselves in the diaspora, created by God for a special mission, endowed with unique qualities and resilience, yet often perceived by surrounding nations as something alien, different, powerful, and therefore potentially dangerous. Its muteness might symbolize historical disenfranchisement, the inability to be heard and understood by a hostile majority. Its blind, crushing force represents both the immense potential for survival and self-defense, and the constant risk of an uncontrolled, perhaps excessive, reaction to real or perceived threats. In later interpretations, especially in the 20th century after the Holocaust and the creation of the State of Israel, the image of the golem was sometimes associated with the Zionist project, the creation of a strong Jewish state capable of defending itself, which, like the legendary golem, was meant to ensure the physical security of the Jewish people, but also carried new, complex challenges, potential risks, and difficult moral dilemmas. Thus, the ancient legend of the golem continues to live, evolve, and be reinterpreted, reflecting the changing anxieties, hopes, and historical experiences of the Jewish people and all humanity, repeatedly asking us the eternal questions about the limits of the permissible, the true price of security, and the very nature of power and responsibility. How clay came alive on the pages of books. Unsurprisingly, the magic of the Prague legend proved so powerful and captivating that the golem confidently stepped far beyond the narrow streets of the Jewish quarter and the dusty pages of Kabbalistic treatises, leaving a deep, indelible mark on world culture, primarily in literature. Imagine how this imagination-stirring story, passed down orally for centuries within the Jewish community, accumulating ever new fantastical details and interpretations, caught the intense attention of European Romantic and Symbolist writers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, fascinated by the exoticism of medieval mysticism, Jewish folklore, and the mysterious atmosphere of Old Prague. One of the first to bring the Golem onto the broad literary stage and make it known to the reading world was the Austrian expressionist writer Gustav Meyrink. His iconic novel, The Golem, published in 1915, is less a direct retelling of the classic legend and more a complex, multi-layered, phantasmagorical, and deeply symbolic work set in the labyrinths of the Prague ghetto, transformed by the author into a space of dreams, hallucinations, and spiritual quests. Meyrink's Golem is less a physical being of clay and more a mysterious spiritual entity, a wandering ghost of the past, a doppelganger haunting the protagonist Athanasius Perneth, or even a symbol of Old Prague's collective unconscious, embodying its hidden fears and desires. The book was a resounding success across Europe and largely shaped the modern, often dark and frightening perception of the Golem as a figure mysterious, otherworldly, and menacing. Completely differently, with far greater knowledge of Jewish tradition and life, the great Yiddish writer and Nobel laureate Isaac Bashevis Singer approached the legend. In his wonderful short stories, written in Yiddish, he returns the Golem to its original Ashkenazi context, often depicting it with great warmth, sympathy, and even gentle humor, while not forgetting the profound, tragic, and philosophical aspects of the myth. His Golem is often a naive, almost childlike and clumsy creature, sincerely trying to serve its people and obey the wise rabbi's commands, but not always able to grasp the complexities and contradictions of the human world, leading to comical or sad consequences. The story of the Golem found an unexpected echo in a completely different genre, science fiction. The famous play by Czech writer Karel Čapek, R.U.R., Rossum's Universal Robots, written in 1920, where the word robot, derived from the Czech word robota, hard, forced labor, serfdom, first appeared and entered all languages, although not mentioning the Golem directly, clearly bears the powerful imprint of the Prague legend about the artificial servant created by man to ease labor, but ultimately rebelling against its creators and threatening humanity. The theme of the creation rebelling against the creator became one of the central and most popular tropes in 20th and 21st century science fiction. Even in the modern world of comics, seemingly far removed from medieval mysticism, traces of the Golem can be found. Some researchers and critics see its undeniable influence, for example, in the character of the Incredible Hulk, the mighty, not always controllable green monster born from a scientific experiment and radiation, who is simultaneously a potential protector of humanity and a terrifying, destructive threat. Thus, the legend of the Golem provided writers of different countries and eras with rich material for contemplation. Themes of artificial intelligence and its dangers, the ethical responsibility of the scientist and creator, the nature of consciousness and soul, the eternal struggle between good and evil, the problem of protecting vulnerable minorities, all found vivid expression in countless novels, stories, plays, and poems, convincingly proving the enduring relevance and power of the ancient Prague myth. How clay came to life on the silver screen. Naturally, such a colorful, visually expressive, and dramatically rich figure as the Golem simply could not fail to attract the keen attention of the new, most dynamic, and popular art form of the 20th century, cinema. Almost from its very inception, directors and screenwriters attempted to capture this gripping story of medieval mysticism, boundless power, the danger of forbidden knowledge, and the tragedy of an artificial creation's rebellion on celluloid film. And here, the key figure who forever linked the image of the Golem with world cinema was the outstanding German actor and director Paul Wegener, who was literally obsessed with the Prague legend and saw immense potential in it for cinematic adaptation. He made 3 films on the subject during the silent era, a testament to his deep fascination with the story. The first film, concisely titled The Golem, Der Golem, was released in 1915, but unfortunately, only small fragments of this groundbreaking film for its time survive today. Wegener's second film, The Golem and the Dancing Girl, Der Golem und die Tänzerin, 1917, was surprisingly a light comedy where Wegener himself played an actor who dresses up as the Golem for a film shoot, leading to amusing misunderstandings. But the true masterpiece of world cinema and the film that forever inscribed the canonical image of the Golem into film history was Wegener's third film, The Golem, How He Came into the World, Der Golem, Wie in die Welt kam, which he co-directed with Karl Bose in 1920. This film is rightly considered one of the most striking and influential examples of German expressionist cinema, alongside The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Wegener not only directed, but also brilliantly played the title role of the Golem, creating that iconic image still associated with the character, a massive, clumsy, angular clay creature with a distinctive hairstyle resembling a cap or helmet and a Star of David carved on its chest, though the historical accuracy of this detail is debated. The film captivated audiences of the time with its impressive special effects, especially in the famous scene of the Golem's animation using a magic pentagram, secret incantations, and the insertion of a capsule containing the Shem, name of God, into its chest, as well as the large-scale stylized sets of the medieval Prague ghetto designed by architect Hans Pulzig. The story in the film was presented as a dark romantic tragedy. The wise Rabbi Loew creates the Golem to protect the Jewish community from the tyranny of a cruel emperor. But the artificial servant unexpectedly falls in love with the rabbi's beautiful daughter, Miriam. When she rejects his love for the young court knight Florian, the Golem, mad with jealousy and grief, goes out of control, spreading panic and destruction in the city. The film's ending is deeply symbolic and humanistic. The rampaging monster is stopped not by Rabbi Lowe's magic or the guard's force, but by a small, innocent Christian girl who curiously approaches the golem and removes the Star of Life, the amulet with the Shem, from his chest to play with it, after which the clay giant lifelessly falls to the ground. This image of the golem, simultaneously powerful and clumsy, dangerous and somewhat touching, a victim of circumstances and his own passions, had an immense, invaluable influence on the further development of the horror and science fiction genres in cinema, particularly on shaping the iconography of Frankenstein's monster in James Whale's classic 1931 film starring Boris Karloff. Later, there were other, less famous adaptations and variations on the golem theme. Such as the popular Czechoslovak satirical comedy The Emperor's Baker, The Baker's Emperor, Císařův pekař, Pekařův císař, 1951, where the golem serves as a tool for alchemists at Rudolf II's court, or the Franco-Czechoslovak film Le Golem, 1967, as well as numerous TV movies, animated features, and episodes of popular series, including the cult classic The X-Files. Cinema actively exploited various aspects of the legend, the mystical atmosphere of old Prague, horror elements, the profound drama of the creator-creation relationship, the problem of the machine's rebellion, proving again and again that the story of the clay giant from Prague possesses truly inexhaustible visual, narrative, and philosophical potential. Why does the golem still walk among us? But the influence of the Prague golem is by no means limited to the pages of ancient books and frames of black and white films. This ancient, multifaceted image continues to stir the minds and imaginations of artists, sculptors, musicians, playwrights, and thinkers. Even today, finding unexpected and sometimes paradoxical echoes in the most diverse spheres of contemporary art, philosophy, and even public discourse. In visual arts, the golem often becomes a powerful metaphor for exploring complex themes of identity, especially Jewish identity, artificiality versus authenticity, unbridled power, and the problem of oppression. Artists use its iconic image to speak about the tragedy of the Holocaust, anxieties related to the creation of artificial intelligence, the nature of political power, and its potential dangers. Its clay, earthy nature, its forced muteness, its paradoxical connection to both the dust of the earth and higher divine forces, all provide rich ground for diverse visual interpretations, from dark expressionist nightmares in the spirit of Meyrink to ironic postmodern installations. In music, the legend also finds vivid expression, inspiring composers to create operas like Jugendalberd's Der Golem, symphonic poems, ballets, and even rock compositions, where the mystical atmosphere of old Prague, the drama of the golem's creation and rebellion, are conveyed through complex soundscapes and musical imagery. But perhaps the most relevant, poignant, and debated aspect today is the philosophical and ethical dimension of the golem story. In our era of rapid, dizzying development in biotechnology, genetic engineering, robotics, and of course, artificial intelligence, AI, the legend of Rabbi Lo and his clay servant sounds more contemporary and prophetic than ever. Are we not ourselves standing on the threshold of creating our own golems? Intelligent machines capable of self-learning, complex decision-making, and perhaps, one day, achieving self-awareness? The questions posed by this ancient legend back in the 16th century confront us today with a new, unprecedented force and urgency. What are the acceptable ethical boundaries of scientific inquiry and technological progress? Are we playing God by trying to create life or intelligence in our own image without fully understanding the consequences? What is our moral responsibility towards our creations, be they complex AI algorithms or genetically modified organisms? What happens if artificial intelligence, like the golem forgotten by Rabbi Lo on Shabbat, escapes our control and turns against us? The legend of the golem serves as an eternal reminder of the need for wisdom, humility, foresight, and deep consideration of the long-term consequences of our actions. The golem is an ancient archetype, a living warning about the dangers of uncontrolled power and the fragile, almost invisible line separating creator and creation, salvation and self-destruction. It forces us to ponder again and again the very essence of humanity. What exactly distinguishes us from a complex machine or a clay doll animated by the magic of ancient spells? The ability to feel, love, empathize, bear moral responsibility for our choices? The story of the golem, born in the foggy alleys of medieval Prague centuries ago, continues to ask us these eternal, uncomfortable questions, remaining surprisingly relevant in the complex, technologically advanced 21st century. Will we hear the footsteps of the clay giant again? And so, our long journey through the winding, misty streets of the golem legend draws to a close. We have traveled from the grim, fear-soaked realities of medieval Prague, where the life of an entire people hung by a thread, to modern scientific laboratories and philosophical debates about artificial intelligence and the future of humanity. The story of the golem, created by the wise and desperate Rabbi Lo from Riverside Clay, and the power of Kabbalah's sacred words, turned out to be not just an old Jewish folktale, but a living, pulsating myth that continues to trouble minds, stir imaginations, and inspire creators worldwide. It is a multifaceted tale of primal fear and unquenchable hope, of cruel oppression and a desperate thirst for protection, of the boundless wisdom of the human spirit and dangerous, destructive hubris. The golem is an ancient magic mirror, initially reflecting the deep anxieties and aspirations of a persecuted Jewish people, but over time, it came to reflect universal, human dilemmas understandable to people of any culture and era. In its massive, clumsy figure, we see the embodiment of the eternal conflict between humanity's audacious desire to control the world, to subdue the elements and life itself, and the bitter understanding of our limited capabilities and the unpredictability of consequences. In its fate lies the reflection of the struggle between the instinctual drive for security at any cost and the enormous risk of creating something uncontrollable that might turn against us. The image of the clay giant, silently wandering the night streets of old Prague, became a potent, inexhaustible symbol used and continuously used by writers, artists, filmmakers, and philosophers to speak about the nature of power and responsibility, the mystery of life and consciousness, the boundaries of human audacity, and the price of progress. Does the golem still sleep its eternal slumber in the dusty, forbidden attic of the old new synagogue, awaiting its hour? Perhaps that will forever remain one of the haunting mysteries of old Prague. But its legend, its story, is definitely alive and continues to resonate. It serves as an important reminder that every human creation, whether a great work of art, a revolutionary scientific discovery, a complex computer algorithm, or a new social structure, carries not only immense potential for good and development, but also the unseen shadow of its creator, their intentions, their fears, their wisdom or recklessness, and of course, their inescapable responsibility. And as long as humanity continues to create, innovate, explore the unknown, and push the boundaries of knowledge, the centuries-old story of the Prague Golem will echo as a vital warning and as an eternal, open question addressed to each of us. Are we ready for the consequences of our own growing power?